Today we're going to build the Paulk SmartBench in 21 minutes, including making all of the patterns. I'm Ron Paulk, and this is the Smart Wood Shop, and this is the Paulk SmartBench. If you want to get a set of plans to build a smart wood shop for yourself or the Paulk SmartBench, there's a link in the description of this video down below where you can go purchase the plans and download them instantaneously 24/7, 365. The Paulk SmartBench plans are the first plans that I've done that I've included a separate page for making the patterns. I've always shown you how to make each and every piece, figuring then you'd make your patterns from that. But I decided that with particularly this one, which I'm going to estimate, I don't know, 50, 100 hours in by making and remaking, and it's to make that shelf on the bottom. This one I'm really proud of and I'm going to hang on to. So I wanted to show you how to make this one because it's got outside dimensions and inside dimensions. So one way it has to grow, one way it has to shrink. The sawhorse design looks identical to my previous sawhorses, but it's different, subtly, but in major ways. And this is the first time that I have made my sawhorses using a nesting method to be more efficient with the plywood. So again, I had outside dimensions where it would grow and inside dimensions where I had to be careful because it's going to shrink the finished product. So I wanted to make sure that the patterns were clear. So there's a separate page in both metric and another page in imperial to show you how to make these patterns. Now, when I was editing this video, the 21-minute portion of actually building it, I had 17 hours of video to go through to find that 21 minutes. It's from beginning to end of building this. So you can watch the video through once, have the plans, and then as you're building the bench, if you have any questions, you can go back and refer to it, knowing that the patterns are going to be the first thing, and the final sanding and detailing is going to be the last thing, and then everything in between. So 17 hours of video means every minute I put into making this particular bench. But that 17 hours reflects the patterns. It also reflects moving the camera, changing camera angles, doing things more than once so that I could get multiple camera angles, and a lot of just standing there head scratching of how I'm going to communicate that to you. So not a very efficient amount of time. If I eliminated the camera work, I would have 8 hours into this build, including the patterns. Once the patterns are made, I can build this bench in between 4 and 6 hours. I could build it in 4 hours, but just taking a nice pace, I'm going to call it 6. So how long does it take to build the bench? Once you have the patterns made, I'm going to say easily 6 hours. I'm starting by making the pattern. This is the pattern I'm going to use to make the pattern for the spreader as well as the pattern for the two sides. It's drilling 4 holes after all the layout, and then connecting the dots there on the table saw, as you've seen me do in so many other videos, finishing the little side cuts with the miter saw, and then a little bit of filing and sanding to get it just right. Now with the pattern, which is larger by the bushing offset to make it so that when I cut out the pattern, it will be the proper size. I started with it set up on one end, moved it to the middle, then moved it to the other. I attached it with pins and just pulled the pins out and stepped it on down. And I had the holes also drilled in the pattern for the screw layout, so I was able, when I was all done with that one piece, that I had this perfect pattern to make the sides. Of course, I labeled it up. I took that same pattern to make the pattern for the spreader, just put it on one end, cut most of it through, then flipped it over and finished out. So with the work of that single pattern and then a router, I was able to make the final patterns absolutely perfect. On to making a much more complicated pattern, but this one is one that's going to save a lot of time, because not only will I make 4 identical sawhorses, but I'll have it set aside for future sawhorses, as this is my go-to sawhorse for all of my workbenches. So I'm just
taking the directions, the plans that I have on my phone, and I'm looking at every dimension and laying it out and just drawing it out. Now that I have it all laid out, it's just a matter of cutting on the lines. With this small track and my cordless track saw, it's incredibly flexible. I can plunge in mid-board, get right to the lines, and just keep turning the board around and laying the track right on the line and getting my cut. You can see if by watching here just how intricate this pattern is, but yet it's so easy to cut. It just took me a few minutes, and then of course I had to finish up the corners as I couldn't cut all the way through with the circular blade. But for the most part, it was quick work of what could have been otherwise a really complicated pattern to make. Now with all the main lines cut, it's just a matter of finishing out those corners, and I just used a jigsaw for this. Easy to finish those cuts out. It took me a lot more time to sketch this out and get the design exactly the way it needed to be, following the plans. Cutting it really was quite simple. I could have eliminated this step of cutting those corners out. Because I'm using a pattern bit and it's a bit round, I could have overcut those corners with the circular saw and it would not have been reflected in the final cut. But I like my patterns to look good, so I went ahead and took the extra few minutes to make it just right. Good to remember to label up the patterns so that you know what they're for and they don't get thrown away. Now it's time to start cutting out all of the pieces for the bench before I do any routing or milling. I'm going to start by getting the top and the bottom. I want to get my big pieces first from the 2 sheets, set those aside, and then I can start breaking down the smaller stuff. After breaking up the plywood into smaller pieces, then it was a lot more efficient to run it through the table saw, get the sides and the spreaders ripped before time to start milling them up. So there I have all of my parts and pieces cut out and ready to start routing. This is the first time I am routing the sawhorses all the way around the outside as well as the inside. Before, I've cut out pieces that were exact width and height, but I decided I'd get more efficient use of my material. I also changed the design slightly, so now I get all 4 sawhorses out of one piece, whereas always in the past I had to get into another piece to get the 4th horse. So I'm able to nest the pattern into the previous cutout and again get a lot more efficient. I still had to change the sawhorse design just slightly. You'd have to look at it hard to even notice how it changed, but just a little change, and then doing it this way, much more efficient use of the plywood. I really like this template. This, like I said when I was making it, big time saver. I did make a slight mistake on this one. I jumped all the way and did the outside one. It should have been up rather than down, and so when I went to jump back to the more internal piece, I had to kind of cant it a little bit. I was able to get it, but I did waste a little bit of material. Don't know what I was thinking, don't know why I jumped ahead there, but I did, and I should have just continued the nesting on down. Once I had that all done, I then took my track and just straightened out that last little piece. That was left over, so you can see here when I make this cut how much is left over from that by using that methodology. And then I jumped into cutting out, started with the spreaders, had 4 of those to do, and just pinned the pattern on and made the cut. I'd always make it most of the way through or all the way through, remove it, vacuum it out, and then do a final cut, a cleanup cut. I always do that. It's just don't know if it makes a lot of difference, but just a nice clean blade cut with nothing in the way. And you can see here this pattern that was made with the pattern, how clean it is and how fast it is. Boy, taking just a little while to make the patterns sure does speed up the manufacturing of my benches, and really of anything. With all the pieces milled up, then I took my cordless router and put a chamfer bit, a 45-degree chamfer bit, and just have just a little tiny bit of it exposed, chamfering all of the edges inside and outside of the cutouts, not the top and the bottom where it's going to be assembled. I will keep and do that at the very end, whatever is exposed to the outside, because obviously I want them to fit together nice and tight. Of course, did the sawhorses inside and out as well. That took the longest, but Sure, a lot quicker than trying to sand the edge. I used to round them over, now I'm doing that chamfer because I do that on all the holes as well. Next up, I assemble the sawhorses. I lay them out flat with the inside laying face up, and then I measure in to find the center hole for the hinge rather than finding the edge of the hinge. I do this because I typically like 4-inch hinges, but I tend to buy 3.5 because I get a better deal on them. So by finding the center hole, it doesn't really matter what size. And then I make a mark down from the top edge so that I set the bottom of the hinge inside. Of course, I'm careful to put the hinge on properly so it folds to the inside. If I put them on upside down, then the horses wouldn't close properly. And then I use a Vicks bit, and they center the holes. So it's a typical door installer's tool, but it works great for those because I'm using hinges. Well, this template, this pattern here was hard fought. I have so many hours and so much material invested to finally figure this one out, but it works great. I'm going to hang on to this one. I literally probably have 30-40 hours into figuring this out. I don't know why, it just really baffled me. But I'm able to just make those end cuts now on that spreader shelf, and also for the sawhorse tabs, flip it over and cut it from the other end. So I just rip that board to the right width and cross cut it to the right length and flush these up to the end, pin them in place, and run the router on them, and I have that perfect spreader shelf. Again, it's something I tried with other plans and with these, and it's nice they're finally ready for prime time. Even though I knew it worked, I just had to check it out one more time. Really excited, you know, got the right spacing and it gives me the right height and everything I'm looking for. Now the tedious job of cutting out the 20mm holes. It does take a while, but it is very satisfying to get this precision MFT hole layout, with the design being 20mm holes, 96mm spacing, with an additional row of holes around the outside edge spaced in 32mm in from the edge. I built all of my tops and router tables and everything using this methodology. Using the PARF Guide Mark II, the rulers they have, this, you've seen me do this so many times. I have used this tool and used this tool. I pretty much use it for everything. There's so many MFT fittings and tables and tops that will work together by sticking to a system. You know, it really matters to get all the spacing just right. And the way that these rulers lock together and pin in, and the drill guide snaps in the holes, there is just really no way to get off, and you just get an absolute perfect layout. And then I just systematically go through. You know, I use the rulers, do that hypotenuse, you know, the 3, 4, 5. In this case, it's actually 6, 8, 10, and get a number of rows that are squared from the horizontal to the vertical. And then I start laying out. The pins drop in those holes, and just, you know, I find a method that feels good. I jump around a little bit here and there because you can really come from any direction once they're laid out. And the holes are drilled all the way through. And so once I get every single hole drilled with the supplied bit, and this is again a pilot hole, this isn't the final hole, but this is the hole that sort of sets everything. Everything will be referenced off of these to get the 20mm holes. But I'll get all these holes drilled, they go all the way through, and then I will flip the top over and use the 20mm bit that's also supplied with the Mark II, the PARF Mark II guide, which has a long nose on it. It's a real high quality bit, you know, it's a carbide bit, but it has this long nose on it, and that nose drops into those pilot holes. And so again, once I flip it over, I will just use that long nose and no guides or anything, and start breaking through the back surface. And that is just to prevent any tear out when I'm doing the final hole through the top. So I end up drilling each 20mm hole twice, once, actually 3 times. I drill it with the pilot hole, and then I drill it to break through the back with the 20 millimeter bit, and then I flip it over and do the final hole with the guide and the pins, and that is how I get those nice tops. Again, it takes a while. I'm going to say that I'm probably in a top this big as close to 2 hours, maybe not quite 2 hours, but it gets up there. And I just, when I'm starting, it feels like I'm never going to finish, but I just keep at it and, jump around from right to left, top to bottom, spinning around, do anything to distract myself. Of course, I have my AirPods in. I'm listening to streaming radio or listening to a podcast, trying to just distract myself, because there really isn't a lot of thinking here. The PARF guide does all the hard work, so it's just a matter of following the numbers. Then I grab up my cordless router. It already has the chamfer bit set up in it. It's just this really slight chamfer that comes in real handy for bench dogs that slip in slightly below the surface with a little angled collar. So I just go through and hit every single hole on the top side. And even though I'm tired and want to quit, I get out my sander and I do the inside as well. I'm not sure it's really necessary, but hard to get in there and sand and do things after the fact. So I go ahead and clean up the inside of the top and cut those chamfers so that I'll be happy with the finished product. I have the shelf spreader, so the straps aren't really necessary, but I decided to go ahead and add them. I've got that kit. It's pretty inexpensive. In fact, the kit I think has enough strap and buckles to do 2 sets of horses. And the reason I decided to do that is there may be times that I want to use the sawhorses without the spreader shelf, without the bench. I just may need a set of sawhorses. And so if they did not have the straps on them, there'd be nothing to keep them from spreading out. So I will just set the horses up with the spacer so that I know they're the right spacing, put the straps on and snug them up. If anything, they're a tad bit looser, maybe widen a little bit if I took it off, but I could tighten them up later if I needed to, but pretty easy to set them up since I know right what the spread is. I decided to make another pattern. This one is to make the holes in the bottom of the bench for the sawhorse hinges, the tab holes. I decided that I wanted a pattern that was the width of the bottom and the top, of course, and also that would go far enough in so that all I have to do is line up the 3 edges, and then the 2 holes I could just clamp the thing on, make the cuts, flip it over to the other side and make the cuts. And it worked out well. And again, it's a pattern that didn't take very long. Drill a couple of holes, cut them out with the jigsaw, clean them up a little bit with a file and sandpaper, just so I get a clean cut, and write save on it so I don't use it or lose it. And then use the router, flip it over, grab the router, just have to clamp it down. No pins necessary, enough room to use clamps. And there you have it. So perfect spacing on those tabs, and I'm going to keep that consistent across my benches. I decided to add a handle right in the center of the bottom and eventually the top. And since I had this pattern already made for the tab holes, decided it was a perfect pattern to just add that to it. So I used the 2-inch bit, drilled 2 holes, connected the dots, and then I was able to just find a center mark and center that on the bottom and eventually on the top and make that cutout. This makes it easier to grab the bench and lift it as opposed to trying to grab it on one side or the other. The Paulk SmartBench plans, the PSBs, are the first plans that I have a page of all the patterns. So all of these patterns that you're seeing are on a page. So you can spend your time making these patterns, and then when you go to start cutting the bench parts up, it's going to be a lot easier. Take note as I go through here that as I finish each piece, I go ahead and detail it out, sand it, bevel the edges, do all of that kind of stuff. I get to the end a lot faster. Sometimes it seems like you're taking more time and going slow, but really the goal is to get the bench done and into production, into use. And that sometimes taking a little bit longer as you go really shortens the whole job overall. I have a little video series up from the past where I installed a few cabinets, and I took you from beginning to end, and I detailed them out, and I Took the time to put the fillers on and just really get them ready to put up on the wall. And I had a lot of comments that, oh, I'd have the cabinets up before you're taking too long. And the reality is that, yeah, if you're measuring it by the hour, people will come in and look and go, oh, this person has the cabinets up and this person, they're still on the ground. But the reality is, I get to the end faster than anybody I've ever met. Not because I'm good or even think I'm good. It's just I like systems, and I know that the end goal is to get to the end. It's to finish. It's to do everything right and get to the end as quick as possible. And I just think having an efficiency where you take care of the details as you go, you get to the end. The job is finished 100%, not 98%, not 95%. You are done, packed up, and moved on before anybody else if you have an efficient methodology. Now I'm pre-drilling all the holes. I'm laying it out. I want nice even spacing. I want things to look good. And so I have stacked the bottom and the top. So the time that I'm taking to detail the top, I'm drilling through the pilot holes and they're going into the bottom at the same time. So I'm getting 2 for 1 for every hole that I'm drilling here. I'm making a spacer pattern here. I had made one and had it all set up, but I was following the directions on the plans where I only show one, but you need 2. And so I ended up making the second one. It was pretty easy, but it definitely makes assembly go faster and more accurate. Side 1 with the spacers in place, the 4 spreaders going quickly. The holes are pre-drilled, the pilot holes. Put a little glue, squeeze them up next to the spacers, screw the screws in, perfect fit. Flip the frame over, install the spacers, grab the side, apply the glue, rinse and repeat. Can't make a mistake. Now I take the same spacers we used to put the spreaders with the sides and clamp them on what will be the underside or the bottom side of the spreaders, and this is where the bottom will go on. And so what will happen is I will push the outside spreader flush with the bottom in this case, and it'll push the internal spreaders into a perfect straight alignment. I've already pre-drilled all of the holes, so there's really no layout here. It's just put those spacers in and start pulling the outside frame right to the edge of the bottom. We know the bottom is exactly the right length, exactly the right width, and it's square. Finally clean up the glue before I put the top on, just because it's a little easier. The top goes on just like the bottom. I made one error here. I got all my glue on and I put the top on, and I realized that I forgot to put the spacers, and I didn't want to move the top around with the glue and mess it up. So I fussed with it a little bit and I got the spacers in and clamped in place. But there's 5 minutes wasted there that I should have been paying attention. And then I did the same thing I did before. It's the same pilot hole, same layout. I don't need to do any measuring or layout. Just pull the outside frame to the outside edge of the top. The top matches the bottom. The frame is all laid out with the spacers. I know that the thing is going to be flat. It's going to be square. It's going to be absolutely perfect. I know I've said it many, many times, but a system, a method, a methodology, being lean, being efficient, this is what it's all about. The way that you see me building the bench here is exactly the way I build a house or do a remodel. I make sure that everything is laid out. Everything is pre-programmed. We know exactly what we're doing, and we have the materials we need to do the job efficiently, and the tools are easily accessible. It's just a matter of having a system, and a system takes time to plan, but you will pay for that time in the savings on the job and get a better job every time. Now I grabbed that pattern I used on the bottom to make the handle, found center, made the handle on the top. This is where a lot of people might say the job is done. The bench is assembled, the sawhorses are together, everything is ready to go. But not for me. I like to detail it, get it all done. I'll do my bevels, sanding. I want it 100% so that when I start using it, I don't have to go back and do that one more thing.
I know the Paulk SmartBench is going to be an incredibly useful tool in your woodworking business or in your hobby. I also know you're going to really enjoy using it as well as building it. Hey, if you've learned anything from these videos, if you'd like to see me make more, be sure to give me a thumbs up and subscribe. And remember, when you subscribe, to ring that bell, because a subscription doesn't do a whole lot for you unless you manually go over and look for videos. If you ring that bell, you're telling YouTube to notify you, to let you know when I put up a new video. Thanks for dropping into the Smart Wood Shop. You stay safe and have a great day.